Oh, hi, you're early. I was just arranging my Heucheras for the next video, but I guess we can start now. I love Heucheras, and I love talking about Heucheras even more. When people ask me what my favorite plant is on my balcony, I usually say Heucheras. People don't really seem to get it. They think it's a little bit bland because there aren't really like striking flowers that they're used to on balconies. So yeah, they don't really seem to get it, but I love them for their texture. Like, that's such an exciting texture I feel here, so ruffly, but also for their colors. I mean, I love that their purples, their greens, and I think it gives a balcony so much interest all year round. So in today's video, I would like to talk a little bit about Heucheras and how to grow and care for them in containers. Because you see Heucheras in gardens quite a lot and they do quite well, but they really manage to perform extremely well in containers as well. I've had a lot of luck growing them in Germany and in London on my balconies. So I will just introduce eight steps that you can follow, and then you should have a lot of success growing Heucheras on your balconies or in your gardens, on your terrace, in containers. So I have come to know Heucheras as very variable plants. They're very variable in their use, very diverse in their colors, their texture and their size, and most importantly, quite easy to take care of and not extremely water hungry. So yeah, can definitely recommend Heucheras. Okay, enough talk about how great Heucheras are. Let's start with the 8 things to consider when growing them in containers. The first thing is container size and the design of Heucheras generally. The container of a Heuchera doesn't have to be huge because Heucheras don't have an enormous root system. I personally think it should be proportionate with the size of the Heuchera. If it's a larger Heuchera, it looks better if it's a larger pot as well. And the bigger the pot, the less watering you have to do. So that's something you can consider. I generally enjoy terracotta pots, but any pot would go as long as it has drainage holes. Heucheras are made of rhizomes. So above they have their root system, and they consist of a rhizome, which means that after a while the plant will push itself up a little bit within the pot. So it will push itself out of the soil. So it makes sense to dig the Heuchera a little bit deeper into the pot from time to time. Alternatively, you can just fill it up with soil once the Heuchera pushed itself out of the pot for a little bit. After 2 years in the same pot, it makes sense to pot the Heuchera in a larger pot. So I would say, yeah, every 2 years, I think that really makes sense. And yeah, I have combined Heucheras with a variety of other plants in arrangements. In this case, I have combined it with a Heucherella, which I think is quite cute. Exactly. Yeah, I think the purple of the Heuchera and the lime green purple of the Heuchera goes really well together. Yeah, and you can also combine Heucheras with Heucheras. Yeah, so I think there are a lot of design possibilities with Heucheras, luckily. And they don't really struggle. I think they don't really have too much root competition when you plant them with other plants. The second point is soil. Heucheras can tolerate slightly moist to well-drained soil. My aunt has had beautiful Heucheras, but she lost some of them because they were in clay soil and they were standing in water in this clay soil, so there wasn't enough drainage, and then you can lose Heucheras. I mean, they're quite easygoing, but yeah, I mean, there is this water issue. They really just don't like to stand in water. So make sure there is sufficient drainage. But this shouldn't really be a problem if you have a pot with a drainage hole. Then another reason to have Heucheras and grow and care for them in pots. The third point is watering. Compared to other plants on my balcony, Heucheras aren't particularly water-hungry plants. So if you want maybe a climate-friendly garden that doesn't necessitate too much water, Heucheras are quite a good plant to go for. I would say rather water too little than too much. As I said in the previous point, you can lose Heucheras if they stand in water, if you water them too much. So rather too little. But again, if you have sufficient drainage and you grow them in pots, it shouldn't really be that much of a problem. When watering, also try to avoid watering the leaves, because one of the problems you find in the newer varieties of Heucheras still is powdery mildew, and you can lose Heucheras, but also Heuchera leaves from powdery mildew. The fourth point is pruning. I made another video on my YouTube channel about how I get my Heucheras ready for spring after winter. And there I show you my pruning routine. So I would say in early spring you can prune your Heucheras, or in autumn as well. You essentially just cut off the spent dried leaves. I have quite a few here that I could just cut off now that we are approaching autumn. They are perennials and they usually bloom from April to September. So if you have these bloom stalks, once they're spent, you can just cut them off, so the Heuchera doesn't spend too much energy on these bloom stalks. But that's essentially what you have to do when it comes to pruning. The fifth point is light and temperature. Heucheras are generally considered part shade plants, not in a direct sun location that has a direct sun for most of the day. Part shade is ideal. But there are differences between the Heucheras. So the general rule of thumb is the darker the leaves of the Heucheras, so you have these purple, dark purple leaves, they can tolerate more sun than lighter Heucheras. So if you have, on the other side here I have green Heuchera, so that's lighter in color, so they can't tolerate as much sunlight. So keep this in mind when you position your Heucheras on your balcony. The darker the leaves, the more sun they can tolerate. And in the UK and Germany, they have been winter hardy for me, and they actually provided a lot of winter interest, which I really loved. I think in terms of US zones, I think it's 4 to 9 for Heucheras. So they are perennial plants, unless it's really, really cold in your area. The sixth point is fertilizing. Heucheras don't require a lot of fertilizing, but I have had quite a lot of success with a light monthly fertilizer with my Heucheras. So I have had quite a lot of healthy leaf growth and beautiful blooms. So it makes sense to fertilize them maybe once a month. And if you don't fertilize it, at least make sure that once a year you exchange the soil of the Heucheras in your pots, because they can just harvest the nutrients that you give them in your soil. So if you don't fertilize them, give them fresh soil at least once a year. The seventh point is all about illnesses. As I mentioned before, powdery mildew can be a problem with Heucheras. So if you have powdery mildew, first of all, check that you don't water the leaves when watering your Heucheras, and that there's enough air circulation, because powdery mildew is a fungal disease and it will spread and it will destroy some of the leaves. So if you see it, first of all, prevent watering it, ensure wind circulation. But once you ensure this, you can remove the affected leaves, and hopefully this will ensure that powdery mildew is under control with your Heucheras. Another thing that might affect Heucheras are nematodes, which are worms that can affect especially the older varieties of Heucheras. This has been reduced among some of the new Heuchera cultures, but it's still worth checking in early spring whether your Heucheras have an infestation of nematodes. The eighth and final point is propagation of Heucheras, which might interest you as well. In my opinion, it's easiest to propagate Heucheras by dividing them. So as I mentioned, they have rhizomes. You can divide individual rhizomes from the Heuchera in spring or autumn when it's not too hot. I might make another video about this if you're interested. It also makes sense, like after every 4 or 5 years, to divide Heucheras anyway, so they don't grow too big, and you can create new plants in general. That's essentially seen as good for the health of the plant if you divide them every 4 to 5 years. Another potential propagation method is through seeds, but seed propagation is only possible for a couple of Heuchera varieties. So you would have to check in advance whether seed propagation is at all possible. Especially the cultured varieties with beautiful colors can oftentimes not be seed propagated because they might be infertile, or the plants from the seeds of these Heucheras will look completely different than from the plant where you got the seed from. So that's something to keep in mind. So I would really advise dividing as your propagation method. Anyway, I think that's it from my side. I hope you found this video useful, and I will see you soon in another video. And until then, enjoy growing and caring for Heucheras in pots. Bye bye.